By late summer 1863, the Confederacy found itself staggering from significant defeats at both Gettysburg and Vicksburg, creating a bleak situation for the southern states. Adding to their woes, the Army of the Cumberland had successfully captured Chattanooga and was pushing further into Georgia. However, the Confederacy's overconfidence in its Union commander offered them a final opportunity to shift the momentum of war and achieve a decisive victory. Unfortunately, this opportunity would ultimately be squandered due to the toxic and dysfunctional environment at the Army of Tennessee's headquarters. Welcome to our latest video, where we delve into the continued advance of Union forces into the heart of the South. In this tumultuous time, the Confederacy squandered their chance for a pivotal victory during the vicious Battle of Chickamauga. 6 months idle in Murfreesboro, President Abraham Lincoln harbored hopes that Major General William Rosecrans would follow up on his victory at Stones River with a swift campaign to capture Chattanooga, thereby fulfilling his dream of liberating pro-Union East Tennessee. However, Lincoln would soon find his hopes dashed. The Army of the Cumberland had been severely weakened and required significant reorganization and reinforcement before it could embark on another offensive. Moreover, the winter in Middle Tennessee had brought freezing rain, transforming the mountainous roads between Murfreesboro and Tullahoma into treacherous mudflows, forcing further delays until summer roads dried out. During the first half of 1863, rather than launching an immediate assault, Rosecrans focused on transforming Murfreesboro into a vital supply base and training center. His soldiers underwent rigorous daily drills, solidifying their combat readiness while they received updated weaponry and supplies. Rosecrans took considerable care in streamlining supply lines, ensuring that when his army finally marched out, it would be the best trained and most well-equipped force in North America, which would be critical for the impending campaign. However, Rosecrans' meticulous preparations were perceived in Washington as reminiscent of General McClellan's indecisiveness. Every time he delayed action, Washington's frustration grew, as the Union needed successes in the Western theater to compensate for the ongoing struggles faced by the Army of the Potomac. Lincoln, in particular, was becoming increasingly anxious and depressed, urging for notable victories. There was also concern from Secretary of War Edwin Stanton regarding the possibility of Braxton Bragg, the Confederate commander, vacating Tennessee to bolster his forces at Vicksburg. Rosecrans, however, remained uninterested in the political implications of his delays. He regarded Stanton's anxieties as misplaced, asserting that military realities, such as impassable roads, dictated his pace. Unlike General Ulysses S. Grant, Rosecrans was not willing to potentially exhaust his troops by forcing them through mud. He believed Bragg was more likely to reposition his troops if attacked, so waiting would effectively trap the Confederate commander. Additionally, he argued that a redeployment to Vicksburg would take significant time, leaving Chattanooga vulnerable, a situation President Davis could not afford. As tensions mounted between Rosecrans and Lincoln, General-in-Chief Henry Halleck considered dismissing Rosecrans, but ultimately only rebuked him for costing the War Department unnecessary expenses due to excessive telegrams. The obstinate Rosecrans replied that he had already mapped out his operation for late June and would not budge beforehand. The problem that cost the West. Had Lincoln and Halleck been aware of the dysfunctional command structure and the struggling conditions of Bragg's army in Tullahoma, they likely would have commended Rosecrans instead of scolding him. The Army of Tennessee was on the brink of starvation. Situated in the Tennessee Barrens, a region notoriously lacking in agricultural resources, Bragg found himself grappling with the challenge of feeding his troops. Ironically, while the crucial railway route he was tasked with defending facilitated the transport of food supplies to Richmond and the Army of Northern Virginia daily, they left his own forces desperately short on provisions. Bragg's troops endured a harsh winter, compounded by his stringent discipline and rigorous training regimes. The dynamics within Bragg's headquarters only exacerbated the situation. His senior officers were not only difficult personalities, but Bragg's own inflexible and haughty demeanor often brought out the worst in them. Insubordination among his generals, particularly Leonidas Polk's open defiance during the Kentucky campaign, sowed division and resentment, with competence being harshly questioned after their performance at the Battle of Perryville. In November, Jefferson Davis took an interest in this disarray, recognizing the turmoil among Bragg's generals. Rather than identify the incompetence of Polk or the unpopularity of Bragg, Davis chose to entrench Bragg's authority and urged unity for the benefit of the Confederacy. This decision was complicated by Davis's long-standing admiration for Bragg, stemming from their shared military history in Mexico. Consequently, to maintain personal relationships, Davis allowed the issue to fester, which only worsened following the defeat at Stones River. Blame circulated, with his generals decrying Bragg for not maintaining an aggressive attack, while Bragg in turn criticized them for a lack of initiative. When Bragg circulated a letter seeking input on his leadership, it ignited a firestorm of criticism rather than the intended dialogue. Once again, Davis was drawn into a dispute, attempting to placate his generals without addressing the root causes of their discontent. Unwilling to dismiss Bragg or appropriately reassign his fractious subordinates, Davis deflected responsibility to Joseph Johnston, the Department of the West commander, who found the situation utterly appalling and promptly returned the matter to Davis. Complicating Davis's ability to replace Bragg were unclear lines of authority regarding Johnston's command. To further examine the conditions of the Army of Tennessee, Davis tasked Johnston with inspecting Bragg's forces, hinting that he would take command if the Army's situation was insufficiently stable. After his inspection, Johnston reported that while the Army of Tennessee was well-trained and equipped, the state of hunger amongst the soldiers could not be pinned on Bragg. Johnston, bound by personal honor, refused to take advantage of Bragg's misfortune and made it evident that Bragg's dismissal rested solely with Davis, a decision Davis continued to avoid. Johnston did manage to mitigate some of the discontent enough to ensure the headquarters could operate effectively before departing for the Vicksburg campaign. Wasting cavalry, both sides wasted precious time and resources during the winter and spring months through mindless cavalry raids. Despite commanding a cavalry force of nearly 16,000, which included Joseph Wheeler's troopers, Bragg's cavalry efforts were largely ineffectual. Nathan Bedford Forrest and John Morgan's independent commands were formidable raiders but fell short in terms of reliable intelligence gathering, leading to a series of unsuccessful raids. Rosecrans, too, facing his own challenges, deployed approximately 9,000 cavalry in counter-raids against Bragg, achieving little success. Wheeler's attempt to retake Fort Donelson resulted in heavy losses in February. In March, Forrest wreaked havoc on rail lines throughout Tennessee without significantly impacting Rosecrans' supply operations. As spring unfolded, Union raids ended in disaster, culminating in Morgan's ill-fated Ohio raid in late May. Despite the panic it instigated, suggesting he was reinforcing Lee's invasion of Pennsylvania, Morgan made no meaningful impact on the war effort and was ultimately captured by Union forces on July 26. The Tullahoma Campaign. Maneuver over bloodshed. Once the rainy roads dried, Rosecrans set June 24th as the date to commence his operations. Instead of engaging in a direct confrontation with Bragg for control of Tennessee, he opted to maneuver his forces into advantageous positions. The most direct route from Murfreesboro to Tullahoma was through Shelbyville, a town heavily fortified by Polk's corps in anticipation of an attack. To counter this, Rosecrans directed his reserves under Gordon Granger to feint an assault towards Shelbyville, while the bulk of his forces would make a rapid move eastward to seize Bell Buckle Gap. The 20th Corps aimed to capture Liberty Gap, while the 14th Corps would maneuver through Hoover's Gap. The key to the operational success lay with the Lightning Brigade, a mounted infantry unit from Indiana and Illinois known for their personal horses and Spencer repeating rifles. Their task was to capture and hold Hoover's Gap on the first day. Failure to do so could jeopardize the entire campaign. The preparation and training paid off handsomely when the Lightning Brigade successfully seized Hoover's Gap from Confederate defenders, managing to repel a counterattack from a full Confederate division despite orders to retreat. In Liberty Gap, McCook initially encountered resistance, but logistical challenges and weather impeded further advances until June 26th. Meanwhile, Bragg's cavalry leaders, Wheeler and Forrest, failed to ascertain the locations of Crittenden's corps or that Shelbyville was merely a feint, allowing Rosecrans' flanking maneuver to unfold without challenge. Bragg's strained communication with his subordinate Hardee only compounded the issue. Hardee was skeptical of Bragg's tactical decisions and secretly developed his own plans to extricate his men from what he considered a flawed defensive position. Rather than follow Bragg's directives to reinforce established defensive lines, Hardee opted to withdraw his troops to Wartrace, leaving an open path for Union forces to exploit. As Union forces advanced, Bragg intended to confront them but was persuaded to retreat behind the Elk River on June 30th and onto Cowan by July 2nd. The untenability of Cowan quickly became apparent, leading to Bragg's decision to withdraw entirely to Chattanooga. The fall of Chattanooga. Rosecrans anticipated accolades for his nearly bloodless achievement in Chattanooga, but his accomplishments were all but eclipsed by the simultaneous victories at Vicksburg and Gettysburg. His only communication of praise came in a telegram from the War Department urging him to quickly destroy Bragg's army, to which Rosecrans gloomily objected that victories should not merely be evaluated by bloodshed. Rather than blindly pursuing Bragg across unfamiliar terrain, Rosecrans opted to first analyze southern routes and rebuild his supply lines while pausing for about a month. Meanwhile, panic gripped Richmond at the prospect of losing Chattanooga, fearing it would sever vital supply and communication lines west of Atlanta. In response, the Army of East Tennessee was redeployed to reinforce Bragg's defense of Chattanooga, even while Johnston diverted additional troops from Mississippi. Yet, neither reinforcement would arrive in time to change the outcome. In efforts to rectify command challenges, Bragg's forces saw Hardee reassigned to Mississippi only to be replaced by the even more fractious D.H. Hill. Rosecrans, intent on evading a direct confrontation with Bragg, dispatched the Lightning Brigade to the ridges surrounding Chattanooga. Starting on August 21st, the brigade began bombarding Confederate positions, causing Bragg to shift his defenses in anticipation of an imminent attack. Meanwhile, Rosecrans orchestrated a masterful maneuver, effectively circumventing Bragg's defenses by moving the majority of his troops through Alabama, cutting off Chattanooga's rear. Upon realizing he had been outmaneuvered, Bragg withdrew on September 8th, just before the Union trap could fully close. The Knoxville Campaign, in the interim, Lincoln's long-awaited liberation of East Tennessee, was set in motion. Ambrose Burnside was reassigned to the west and was tasked with rebuilding the Army of the Ohio, comprising the 9th and 23rd Corps. Initially, he intended to march on Knoxville in early June, but orders to reinforce Grant delayed him until mid-August. Finally, setting out on August 16th, Burnside quickly outflanked Confederate defenses along the Cumberland Gap. The Confederate brigades left to secure Tennessee were to dispersed and disorganized to mount an effective overconfidence and the road to Chickamauga. Despite his victory, Rosecrans, convinced that the Confederates were utterly demoralized after losing both Chattanooga and Vicksburg, failed to pause. Assuming that Bragg's forces would retreat either to Rome or possibly even Atlanta, he hastily spread his forces and advanced into Georgia, a decision that would prove reckless. In reality, Bragg had only retreated to Lafayette, located just 20 miles south of Chattanooga. As Bragg received reinforcements, he learned that James Longstreet's corps was on its way by train, though it faced considerable logistical challenges due to the Union's control over direct rail routes. Bragg prepared to launch a counteroffensive, only to be bolstered in his ruse by deceptive intelligence suggesting Union forces were still on the retreat. Acting on this faulty information, Rosecrans dispatched cavalry to disrupt rail lines without verifying the accuracy of his intelligence. As a result, he had his corps advance through various passes, planning to regroup at Rome to ensnare Bragg, an intention that played directly into Bragg's strategy. Unfortunately for Bragg, the performance of his generals failed to meet expectations. Between September 10th and 13th, Bragg concentrated superior forces against isolated Union divisions only to see his subordinates hesitate, resulting in wasted opportunities. Only Patrick Cleburne's division actively engaged on September 11th, which motivated Rosecrans to reevaluate his own strategy. In response to the last-minute movements from his troops, Rosecrans ordered McCook and Thomas to regain contact with Crittenden at Stevens Gap. Despite brief contacts and preliminary engagements on September 18, 1863, Bragg's forces mismanaged their initial encounters due to poor communication and a lack of decisive action. As events unfolded that day, missteps on both sides would pave the way for one of the bloodiest confrontations of the war, the forthcoming Battle of Chickamauga. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to support our work and never miss an upload. Like this video, drop a comment, and share it with others to show your support and help us grow this historical community.